Hello and welcome to SBN Newsmakers. I'm your host, Steve Lubetkin. As we've reported in several of these programs, the free press in the United States is facing a superstorm of challenges, from declining readership of print news publications to the loss of advertising revenue to online platforms, and the blistering attacks on its credibility from politicians ranging from local leaders all the way up to President Trump, with his baseless accusations of false reporting and his attacks on freedom of the press. Joining us to talk about the state of American journalism on this episode of SBN Newsmakers is Joe Weber, who most recently was the Jerry and Karla Huse Professor of News-Editorial at the College of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Joe's also been a visiting professor at Shanghai University of Finance and Economics and was with Business Week magazine for more than 2 decades, concluding as chief of correspondence there. I should add, Joe has solid New Jersey roots, beginning his journalism career amidst the smell of ink and newsprint at the Home News in New Brunswick, New Jersey in the 1970s. Joe, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Happy to be with you, Steve.
Joe, you've had a distinguished career that includes being one of the senior people at Business Week magazine, and then going on into a career as a journalism professor, and now starting a new chapter with a Substack commentary newsletter. Talk about the journey. What's it been like going from the traditional print journalism to the journalism instruction and so on?
Oh, the world has changed so much. When I started out as a copy boy, actually a proofreader in the back shop of a newspaper in New Jersey. I worked among the hot lead type machines. Then I fetched hamburgers and whatnot for reporters. And those jobs don't even exist anymore. The hot lead type has gone away. The copy boys and copy girls have gone away. The way we got into the business really disappeared. It was also really strong local journalism, and we're seeing far less of that these days than we have been seeing for a long time. So, we've seen that sort of thing really erode. Then in the magazine world, I worked at a few other places, but I wound up at Business Week magazine for about 22 years. And Business Week magazine got swallowed up by Bloomberg News. It had been a wonderful independent magazine for over 60 years. But magazines in general are shrinking and declining. So we've seen that kind of deteriorate. In a way, and now I'm watching the academic world sort of implode, particularly in journalism instruction. So in a way, my career has followed the industry's downfall. So I've seen that, and it's hard to remain optimistic, frankly, given all those changes that we've seen, that I've seen in my personal experience in journalism, as well as just from observing the world. So it's been a problematic area, to say the least.
What are the consequences of this decline in journalism? I mean, it has some real tangible impact on how people think, how people make decisions, what they understand about what reality is.
Steve, you're right on target. And I made a few notes, so let me share with you some statistics and things like that are very sobering. I mean, the bottom line is that the distribution of accurate, fair, thorough, and balanced news in the U.S. these days is in terrible shape, nationally and locally. We've had so many deaths of newspapers that lots of people are simply denied access to local news. And that's vital for our democracy on the local level and beyond. A few stats I can share with you. Between 2004 and last year, in that 20-year period, 3,200 weekly publications closed or merged. Local papers were dying at the rate of about 2 a week in 2022. That rose to 2.5 a week in 2023. And as of 2 years ago, there were about 6,000 newspapers left, down from about 8,900. So 1/3 had disappeared. We had news deserts all over the country, places where people can get no local news, or for that matter, national news, unless they go on the internet. The impact has been just profound on a local level. There's also national and regional problems. They're more of a political nature, and we can talk about those if you'd like as well. But the main point that I'm making is the sources of reliable, true, accurate, and fair information have really dwindled for many, many Americans. And that's a threat to our democracy. It's a threat to an informed public, both on the local and national level. It's really rather disturbing.
What is the specific consequence for people in terms of local news? If you don't have a local newspaper covering local government and local businesses, what will people be missing that they may not even realize they're missing?
I'll give you an example of that. So I live in Summit County, Colorado. We are blessed with a daily paper here. It's a free paper, but it's a daily paper. And that paper covers local stuff intensively. So for instance, in one of the towns nearby, a town called Dillon, they had a recall election. It was really important for people in that town to read what the incumbent politicians were saying, as well as those who were reelected or elected anew to their positions. There's a big issue in that town in terms of development. A developer wants to come in and create a huge development. That sort of thing has to be covered. It has to be followed. If that's not followed, then basically it's up to the politicians to do whatever they want to do. The public will really have no say other than by going to council meetings and such, which very few people have the time to do. So I think it would be a huge loss if we did not have this daily paper here in Summit County. Fortunately, we do.
It's almost as if the local politicians, knowing that they're not being covered in some areas, will go ahead and do things that they might not think of doing if there was public coverage of what they're doing.
Steve, you are thinking like a reporter now. One of the things that I learned from my earliest days in newspapering was to hold everything up to a degree of skepticism. When you're dealing with politicians, the question is always self-interest. Why are they in that business? Why are they doing that? Are they doing it to help themselves? Or are they doing it for the public good? And you will see politicians who do it for the public good, and you will see politicians who do it for ego and money. So, the challenge is that the politicians who do it for ego and money could see great opportunity in usurping the proprieties of democracy, if you will, and enriching themselves. And if there is no check on that in terms of local journalists reporting on them, there's no real oversight other than, judicial authorities and so on. And, they need local news to alert them to what's going on in the local towns. So the system really loses overall. I mean, there's a reason that the media is called the fourth estate, right? I mean, the idea is that we can serve as a check. We're not elected, we're not appointed, we're not official, but we can serve a check on bad governance and bad oversight. And if that function goes away, the public loses.
And now it seems we're seeing that on a more regional and even national level as the major publications that are left thriving to some extent are starting to what seems to be pulling back from aggressive news coverage. We've seen a lot of controversy over the Washington Post and its owner's decision to limit the editorial page and even to go so far as to say certain opinions, we're going to leave them to other people to cover.
Yeah. Again, you're spot on. And we're seeing that in several major publications. The Washington Post is definitely one of them. Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, has some other businesses that are far more significant to him financially that depend on the goodwill of the Trump administration. He's got his Amazon Web Services business in particular. He's got a commercial space venture. The contracts in those deals are extremely important to Jeff Bezos. More important, it would seem, than the independent journalism that he actually championed and permitted at the Washington Post for most of the time that he's owned it. He was at great odds with the Trump administration in the first term. Trump was threatening him up and down because he hated the coverage he was getting in the Washington Post. Well, Bezos is now changing his tune. And he's becoming he's intimidating the people at the Washington Post, reducing the staff, shrinking it. Financially, it's not a particularly good operation. So he cares less about that than he cares about the other things. From a business standpoint, it's eminently understandable. He's looking after his main financial interests. From an ethical and journalistic standpoint, it's reprehensible, absolutely reprehensible. There's been some stories in the Atlantic, for instance, a wonderful piece by the former editor of the Washington Post, Martin Barron, in which he just basically rips Bezos apart because, Bezos is genuflecting, and as are so many others. Los Angeles Times is another one. It's more of a regional publication than the Washington Post is, but it's still a significant publication that informs a lot of people on the West Coast. And the owner there, a fellow by the name of Patrick Soon-Shiong, is also genuflecting to Trump. He's a surgeon and he's a medical entrepreneur. Well, the LA Times is a small part of his operation. He owns a company called Immunity Bio. It is vulnerable to Trump administration actions through the FDA. It counts on those. It's essential for that business. So what we have here are conflicting interests on the part of these billionaire owners that is leading to erosion in some of the best journalism publications around. And it's really troubling. I mean, thank goodness we've got the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, which is, you may agree or disagree with some of their editorial page stands. They're very conservative. They tend to be a little more sympathetic to Trump than other publications. But the Wall Street Journal, which is a Fox operation, is actually very independent in its news pages. And it reports critically. New York Times reports critically. Will the Washington Post continue to report critically in the news pages? It's an open question, and it looks really doubtful. But, there's even a larger question than that, Steve. The question is, it's a very small number of people, relatively speaking, who follow these publications, who subscribe to these publications, who read these publications online even. The great virtue of the net is that these quality publications are available now. You can get them anywhere, and that's great. And there's great digital circulation for the New York Times, for instance, and for that matter, still for the Washington Post and for the Wall Street Journal. Great digital circulation worldwide for it. So it's available, but it's a relatively small number of people who will read those quality publications. And that is really, really disheartening.
And the problem for a lot of people is that the media has splintered into pick your own viewpoint. You can pick a publication that aligns with what you want the world to be, and you don't have to listen to people who are telling you something otherwise.
That is sadly true. And in some cases, people are not even reading the publications, although, obviously if they read Fox, you can read Fox as well as watch it on TV. And if you read or watch Fox, you're getting a very different view of reality than you are from CNN or other mass media, certainly from the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, et cetera. So it's and MSNBC is another one. You pick your own, bias, if you will, and you find things on those outlets that confirm your bias. People like to be comfortable. They like to read things that confirm their points of view. And that's true of the left and the right. I mean, I'm agnostic on that. That's the fact. People like to have their viewpoints reinforced.
So what's a solution for particularly the corporate publications? We hear more and more the term corporate media, meaning the publications like the Washington Post and the New York Times that are owned by large corporations with other business interests. What kind of a solution could you suggest that might make those publications a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more independent? And maybe it means that the people who own them right now shouldn't be owning them.
Well, I would certainly agree with the latter point. We had sort of a misguided faith in the billionaires for a while. People like Bezos, again, it worked for a while. It's not working right now. For that matter, people like Rupert Murdoch and his operation, clearly very politically biased and influencing all their outlets. I think that's a tragedy. So the question is, what can you have as an alternative to these billionaire owners? Well, there are nonprofits. There are many outlets, particularly the outlets that you find online, outlets like, Politico and ProPublica and so on, that rely on viewer support or grants or other things, subscriber support. Substacks have been emerging in a big way. Podcasts like your own have been emerging in a big way. And those are all independent voices, and that's fabulous. And they do have to have independent ownership that is not beholden to any particular political power structure. I don't care whether it's Democrats or Republicans who are in charge. The point is the media needs to be independent of those folks. It cannot be run by essentially oligarchs. I think that the nonprofit opportunity is out there. It is possible if we could come up with some sort of a government support mechanism that could be independent of politicians, that we could do well. NPR actually gets very little of its support from the U.S. government, but it did get a lot at one time. It's really migrated and broadened its base of support. Foundations and so on support it. So I think that's a reasonable model. But can you support a newspaper based on that? I don't know. And again, I hate to sound pessimistic, but outlets like NPR, for instance, do a superb job. They have very small staffs. So many of these alternative newcomers to the field they can support very small staffs. Certainly the independent podcasters like yourself and the Substack outlets, very small staffs.
Yeah, despite the way it looks, we do have a small staff here.
That's good. But I mean, the point is you can't cover the world, with a small
Correct.
staff.
That's true.
You see the Washington press corps dwindling, getting shut out in some cases of the White House. That's happened with AP, for instance. And it's, it throttles back the information. In some ways we are awash in information as never before. I mean, it's simply extraordinary how much is available out there to people. But do we have the depth that we once had? Do we have the substance that we once had? That's really a challenge.
And I think one of the things that you mentioned, Substack, we're seeing an increasing number of traditional media professionals jumping over that bridge and starting newsletters and publications on Substack. Jennifer Rubin from the Washington Post, who's working with Norm Eisen on The Contrarian. Jim Acosta from CNN has started a very successful Substack publication, and he's doing live video reports and interviews with people several times a day. And he's got a significant number of followers. While it may be a small audience, it's possible for those people to make a living, potentially, doing this and getting subscribers who kick in a couple of dollars a month. What's your take?
That's absolutely true. I would mention another one, Harry Litman, who is a former U.S. attorney, who was a columnist for the LA Times until he quit and discussed what's going on there. He's got a Substack, and he looks particularly at the law and legal issues. Very important in terms of coverage of the DOJ right now. I think, and Jennifer Rubin, of course, The Contrarian is superb, as is Acosta. Dan Rather has a Substack, right. A former CBS anchor. He's got something called Steady, small staff again. And I think those things are very, very important. But one thing that I would point, and let me go back to one of the deans of the Substack field. She's not a journalist, but Heather Cox Robinson is a wonderful Boston College historian who really created Substack in a sense. I mean, she was the most popular and continues, I believe, to be the most popular person on it. All those things are valuable. All those things are really important. However, they are not doing, for the most part, they are not doing original reporting. Jennifer Rubin does a little bit, and her people do a little bit. But for the most part, they're not doing the original beat reporting that really needs to be done to follow the White House, to follow DOJ, to follow all those. And the other thing to bear in mind about them, they are very much viewpoint oriented. They really are opinionated outlets. I mean, I have my own Substack, and it's highly opinionated. I make no apologies about that, and neither do any of the other folks who do this sort of thing. They're very clear in their point of view. The problem with that is the thing that you alluded to earlier. You can shop around for the media that suits you, and the people who are going to subscribe to those publications, follow those publications, are going to be basically critics of the current administration, the current regime. And, I personally don't disagree with them. I do very much agree with the critics. But it's not the same as straightforward, unbiased, down the middle journalism, the kind of stuff that we really need to see.
How do you persuade people of the opposite political viewpoint to read some of the information that these sort of liberal-leaning Substack publications are providing? They're while they may have a point of view or an opinion, they're also providing factual information that contradicts the information or misinformation that's coming out of the government these days.
I quite agree with you on that. And it's really interesting because it gets very personal. So I have a number of siblings who are very strong Trump supporters, have been for a number of years.
That must make for an interesting Thanksgiving dinner.
Well, I've got a wedding coming up, and it'll be interesting to see whether people drink too much at the wedding. That could be a problem. But the issue there, and we wind up going back and forth, some of these siblings and I, over reputable sources and the question of reputable sources. And what I keep hearing is, you are inundating me with these liberal sources who are biased and who have an agenda and are not giving me the straight story. And what I get in return is Instagram and TikTok and Reels and, a lot of, frankly, the pablum that has become the information ecosystem. I was reading one thing recently. Let me see if I can find this. TikTok now is a huge source of news for adults under 30. Something on the order of a third of them get their news primarily from TikTok.
They think they're getting news.
They think they're getting news. That's right. They think they're getting news. What they're getting is, insubstantial pablum or politicians who are, speaking freely. This one sibling of mine says that she wants news that's unfiltered by opinion makers. She doesn't want opinion. She wants straight news. So she feels that if she watches the politicians herself, she can make up her mind better. Well, that goes only so far. If you looked at Trump's recent appearance in the Congress, it was rife with misstatements, exaggerations, and outright lies.
Yeah, there's almost nothing he said that was factual.
It's easy to find those misstatements and lies, but you need somebody independent of him who is calling them out. And then the person, like my siblings, have to be willing to listen to those critics. And that's the problem. They're not. They just shut things out. It's, okay, if it doesn't comport with my worldview, I just don't want to hear it. And I don't have the time for it. So that's a problem.
Is there a point at which the actions being taken that ultimately have a negative effect on the people even who voted for Donald Trump, that they start to realize that maybe they're not getting what they thought they were getting? Do you think that's going to change their minds in any way?
That's really a fascinating question. And frankly, it's beyond my expertise. I think political scientists have to weigh in on that sort of thing. But I will offer a couple of observations. Farmers and the farming community, and I worked in Nebraska for quite a number of years. I taught at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for about 14 years. And that's a red state. Farmers overwhelmingly tend to support Trump. They tend to be very conservative, and they think that Trump will do what's in their interest and in the world's interest, the country's interest. Well, they're going to get screwed royally by these tariffs. They're already feeling the pinch. So their personal interests.
And the cutoff of the USAID funding.
Yes, that's exactly.
There's an enormous amount of agricultural supplies that are not going to be purchased for shipment overseas.
That's exactly true. And so they are going to be adversely affected in a very personal way by the man they elected. The question is it just cognitive dissonance? Is it a matter of they just can't see the connection between what he's doing in their pocketbook,
Or will they blame someone else?
or they blame somebody else, or they say things like, well, we're in early days right now, and, we have to see how it plays out. He helped us out the last time. You remember, I don't know if you remember, but in the first term, there were similar tariff problems regarding farmers, and he sent billions and billions and billions of dollars of aid to farmers to try to compensate them for that. I don't know if they succeeded, but, he did that. So one thing that I have learned from political scientists that I've interviewed in the past is once people develop political standpoints, it is almost impossible to move them away from that. And that's true of liberals, and that's true of conservatives. No matter how much evidence you provide, no matter how much factual material you provide, they will not shake what would become core beliefs. And when I look at the MAGA rallies and so on, these people it's almost like a religious devotion.
It is. It's like a cult.
Yeah. And that for the most part, we have not seen on the Democratic side. There's not this cult of personality. Kamala Harris did not have a cult of personality. Biden certainly did not have a cult of personality. They look at things differently. But the MAGA devotees are, to him, he is the guru. To them, he is the guru who can do no wrong. And, they'll ride with him whatever way he's going. I mean, again, I actually wrote a book about a mainstream Republican. I wrote his biography. He was a trade representative, very, very influential trade representative, committed Republican. He was head of the RNC, as a matter of fact, later on. These were people who thought about things critically. They didn't worship individual politicians. And that has changed radically in the Republican Party. I mean, it's been basically co-opted, taken over. And it's kind of scary.
What do you think is...
there was a piece that I just saw and talk about Substacks. So Adam Kinzinger is one of the folks that, I follow a bit on Substack.
He's a former Republican congressman who was on the insurrection investigation.
Correct. And he also was a lieutenant colonel in the military. Before that, he's a man of accomplishment and ethics and principles. And, he was a committed Republican. Liz Cheney is another example, a committed. And her father was vice president. I mean, these are people of the traditional Republican mold who have been ousted by the party. And it's just absolutely appalling. But Kinzinger was writing his Substack, recent one, in which he was talking about watching the performance in Congress. And he said, his former party members who are now in the Congress were like barking seals, hoping for a toss of fish. And it's sad. But, when I watched that spectacle, I saw much the same thing. I mean, every line was drawing applause. And very few of those lines were based in reality.
Do you think you have a pessimistic view of where the democracy is headed? Do you think it's going to survive?
Well, on that score, I do think that there are some checks and balances that remain. Forget the Congress. They're not going to be helpful. Forget the Senate. It's not going to be helpful. But, at least in the short run. But 2 years from now, there's another election. Hopefully.
We think.
We think. 2 years from now, there's another election. There'll be an opportunity for the public, those who feel the burn of these policies, to come out and vote. And traditionally, midterm elections tend to oust the party in power. So, there could be a change then. In addition, we've also got the courts. There is an amazing number of lawsuits that have been filed against the Trump administration actions. And so far, quite a number of the courts have been holding, including the Supreme Court in a recent decision, have been holding for the critics, the people who say he doesn't have the right to fire all these people, doesn't have the right to cut off USAID, doesn't have the right to do these things. Those lawsuits are sort of a last bastion, if you will, at least until there's another election. And we'll see what happens. The tragedy, it's not so much a question of democracy as it is efficient government. The tragedy is while those lawsuits proceed, and it's going to take years for them to work their way through, while those lawsuits proceed, a lot of people are leaving government. A lot of people are jumping ship because they see it as it's a no-win situation. And he's firing a lot of people.
It's a brain drain that may be irreplaceable.
Exactly. And certainly for the next 2 years, there's going to be chaos. And even if the court rulings go against him, a lot of people will have left, and government will have been shrunk, and services will have been reduced. I live in Colorado. Big issue right now is who's going to take care of our national forests and national parks. Lots and lots of people have been let go. Are they going to be coming back? If they leave, they have to find alternative jobs. They have to put food on their tables.
With the executive order he just signed, inviting timber cutting in the national forest, there may not be any national forest left to take care of.
Well, certainly nobody to help us through them, to guide us, to regulate them, to help people who want to visit the outdoors.
Indeed. Well, we live in some strange and chaotic times, and Joe, I appreciate you taking the time to give us some perspective on it from a journalistic standpoint, and we appreciate you being with us on the program today.
It's very kind of you to invite me. I hope I didn't sound too pessimistic. Fundamentally, I'm an optimist. I hope that the system corrects itself in the next couple of years. I believe it will. I hope it will.
Well, we will certainly check back with you, see how things are going.
Take care.
All right. And that'll wrap things up for this episode of SBN Newsmakers. If you have comments or questions about our broadcasts, you can email me at steve@statebroadcastnews.com. For everyone here at State Broadcast News, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you out there on the net. Take good care.